Some beings are born into darkness. Others descend into it through choice or circumstance. But there are rare few who emerge from the void itself, creatures so fundamentally wrong that the universe recoils at their very existence. The being who would become known as DARTH VITIATE, the Sith Emperor, Valkorian, and by countless other names across 15 centuries of manipulation and terror, was one such entity. His story begins not with ambition or tragedy, but with an absence of light, of warmth, of anything resembling humanity. The birth of darkness. In the year 5139, before the Battle of Yavin, on a fertile agricultural world called Medrias at the far edge of the old Sith Empire, a child was born who should never have drawn breath. The planet itself was unremarkable, one of countless farming worlds that fed the expanding Sith civilization during what historians would call the Golden Age of the Sith. Fields of golden grain stretched across continents. Villages dotted the landscape. Simple folk tending the land under the distant rule of Lord Dramath, a Sith pureblood who cared little for the daily governance of his world. Lord Dramath preferred indulgence to administration. He traveled his planet hosting lavish feasts, visiting settlements across Medrias when the mood struck him. During one such journey to the remote northern continent, far from his seat of power, Dramath had a brief affair with a poor farm woman. He thought nothing of it afterward. The woman was beneath his notice, a momentary diversion quickly forgotten as he returned to his palaces and pleasures. He never learned her name. He certainly never imagined that their union would birth the most dangerous being the galaxy had ever known. 9 months later, in that distant farming village, the woman gave birth to a son. Her husband, a simple farmer who knew nothing of the Force, believed the child was his. But from the moment of his first breath, the infant was profoundly wrong. They say his eyes were black as the void of space, lightless wells that swallowed rather than reflected. He never cried, not even once. No wail of hunger or discomfort ever passed his lips. Animals would not approach him. Birds altered their flight paths to avoid the building where he lay. The family's livestock became agitated when brought near the house. When the child spoke, his voice carried weight it should not have possessed. There was power in it, a resonance that made others pause and listen without understanding why. The boy's mother felt it most acutely. She would later describe a constant wrongness surrounding her son, a presence that made her skin crawl even as maternal instinct compelled her to care for him. She never bonded with the child. How could she? He was less an infant than a void given flesh. The boy they named Tenebrae grew in isolation. He seemed to observe rather than experience the world around him. While other children played and learned, Tenebrae watched with those bottomless black eyes, cataloging weaknesses, measuring the currents of fear and anger that flowed between people. By age 6, his connection to the Force manifested with terrifying clarity. The revelation came during an argument. Tenebrae's farmer stepfather had grown suspicious of the boy's unusual abilities. Neither he nor his wife possessed any Force sensitivity, yet their son demonstrated powers that should have been impossible. The farmer confronted his wife in front of young Tenebrae, demanding the truth. The woman broke under the pressure of his anger. Through tears, she confessed her adultery with Lord Dramath, the Sith Lord who ruled their world. The farmer's rage exploded. He struck his wife, violence born of betrayal and humiliation. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had shown Tenebrae the taste of true anger, true hatred. The 6-year-old child fed on that dark emotion, drinking it in like water after a drought. The power flooding through him was intoxicating. With nothing more than a thought, Tenebrae reached out through the force and snapped his stepfather's neck. The man collapsed instantly, life extinguished in a heartbeat. The boy then turned his attention to his mother. For months, he tortured her. The specifics of that torment are lost to history, but the psychological and physical agony he inflicted served a purpose beyond mere revenge. Tenebrae was learning. He discovered how suffering could fuel the dark side, how pain and fear created ripples in the force that he could harvest and consume. When he finally allowed his mother to die, Tenebrae had already moved beyond regarding her as a person. She had become a resource, material for his experiments in the dark side. With both parents dead, Tenebrae turned his attention to the surrounding villages. He began systematically conquering his homeland through a combination of overwhelming force power and psychological manipulation. Some he killed outright, demonstrating his strength to terrify others into submission. Many more he broke mentally, twisting their minds until they served him with fanatical devotion. He would torture victims publicly for days, feeding on their suffering while demonstrating to observers the futility of resistance. Tenebrae's reputation spread across the northern continent like a shadow. A child of merely 6 years old commanded growing legions of followers, his power increasing with each life he destroyed or enslaved. The villages fell one by one. Those who refused to bow were massacred. Those who submitted became extensions of his will. By age 10, Tenebrae ruled the entire northern continent, and word of his atrocities had finally reached Lord Dramath in his distant palace. Dramath's initial response was dismissal. Rumors of a powerful child seemed absurd, likely exaggerated tales from simple-minded farmers. But when his envoys to the northern continent failed to return, curiosity compelled the Sith Lord to investigate personally. After days of travel, Lord Dramath arrived at the source of the disturbance. There he found his illegitimate son, now a boy of 10, commanding an army of devoted followers and radiating dark side power that gave even the experienced Sith Lord pause. Dramath intended to test the child to determine if Tenebrae was worthy of serving as his apprentice or if the boy should simply be executed as a threat. But Tenebrae had no intention of serving anyone. He had no intention of dying either. When father and biological son met face to face, the child proved devastatingly stronger. The confrontation was brief and brutal. Tenebrae stripped Lord Dramath of his connection to the Force, severing the power that had defined the Sith Lord's entire existence. But death would have been a mercy, and Tenebrae had learned the value of prolonged suffering. Instead of killing Dramath, the 10-year-old child twisted and perverted his father's own Sith holocron, corrupting the crystalline lattices through sheer force of will. He then used that corrupted holocron to imprison Lord Dramath's spirit, trapping his father's essence in an eternal prison of torment. Lord Dramath spent his final moments of freedom weeping in terror, gazing up into the black eyes of his son. Those eyes held no triumph, no satisfaction, only cold calculation. Tenebrae had gained valuable information about Sith techniques, a powerful position as ruler of Medrius, and an eternal victim to torture at his leisure. It was, by the child's assessment, a productive day. With Lord Dramath defeated, Tenebrae faced challenges from other Sith Lords who sought to claim the now vacant throne of Medrias. Dramath's firstborn son, a legitimate heir, fled the planet rather than face the monster who had destroyed their father. But others were not so wise. Over the next 3 years, every Sith who attempted to seize control of Medrias fell before Tenebrae's power. With each victory, the child grew stronger and more ruthless, perfecting his command of the dark side. By age 13, Tenebrae had completely subjugated his homeworld. He controlled every settlement, every resource, every living being on Medrias. The planet had become an extension of his will. It was time to legitimize his rule. Tenebrae traveled to Ziost, the throne world of the Sith Empire, to present himself before Marka Ragnos, the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith and ruler of the Sith Council. Marka Ragnos was widely regarded as one of the greatest Sith Lords in history. His rule had brought the Sith Empire to unprecedented heights of power and prosperity. The golden age of the Sith flourished under his steady hand. He was a being of immense power and even greater political acumen, who had maintained his position for over a century through a combination of strength and cunning manipulation. When the 13-year-old Tenebrae appeared before the Dark Lord, Marka Ragnos immediately recognized something extraordinary. The child radiated dark side power that rivaled Sith Lords decades his senior. His ambition was naked and absolute. His ruthlessness was already legendary. Here stood a being who had conquered an entire world before reaching adolescence. Impressed by the teenager's demonstration of power and ambition, Marka Ragnos granted Tenebrae official recognition as the ruler of Medrias and elevated him to the rank of Sith Lord, bestowing upon him the title of Lord Vitiate. The newly named Lord Vitiate returned to his homeworld with his authority secured. One of his first acts was to rename the planet. Medrias, with its associations to his biological father and the mundane life he had obliterated, would be erased. The world would henceforth be known as Nathema. On that planet, on the site of his childhood home where he had murdered its parents, Vitiate constructed a grand palace. The symbolism was deliberate. He had risen from nothing, from common farmer stock, to become a recognized Sith Lord. The palace stood as a monument to power claimed through will and violence, century of isolation. With his position secured and his world renamed, Lord Vitiate made a decision that would define the next 100 years. He chose isolation. While other Sith Lords engaged in the endless power struggles that characterized the Empire, fighting for position on the Dark Council or vying for Marka Ragnos's favor, Vitiate removed himself entirely from such contests. Nathema became a hermit kingdom, rarely interacting with the broader empire. This isolation was not born of fear or weakness. Vitiate had already proven he could crush other Sith Lords when necessary. Rather, his withdrawal was strategic. The young Sith Lord had tasted power, had felt the intoxication of drawing on others' suffering and fear, but he wanted more. He wanted to understand the dark side at its deepest levels. The constant political maneuvering of the Sith Empire was a distraction from his true goal, achieving power so absolute that death itself would become irrelevant. From his palace on Nathema, Vitiate delved into ancient Sith knowledge. He studied texts that other Sith Lords deemed too dangerous or too theoretical. He conducted experiments that pushed the boundaries of Sith alchemy and sorcery. The screams of his test subjects echoed through the palace chambers as Vitiate explored the limits of suffering the living could endure, mapping the connections between pain, fear, death, and the dark side energy they generated. Vitiate's research was methodical and exhaustive. He investigated every aspect of the Force that related to extending life or increasing power. He studied the ancient Sith technique of essence transfer, by which a Sith could move their consciousness from one body to another. He explored the possibility of binding the Force itself to his will, of consuming not just individual lives, but entire ecosystems of energy. These were not the mad experiments of a reckless researcher, but the calculated investigations of a brilliant and utterly immoral mind. During this period, the Sith Empire continued to evolve without Vitiate's participation. Marka Ragnos eventually died, and his funeral became the flashpoint for a power struggle between Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh. The two Sith Lords nearly destroyed each other at Ragnos' tomb before the spirit of the dead Dark Lord appeared and warned them of future dangers. Sadow eventually claimed leadership and set in motion the events that would lead to the Great Hyperspace War. Vitiate observed these developments with detached interest. The political intrigue meant nothing to him personally. When Naga Sadow led the Sith Empire into war against the Galactic Republic in the year 5000 BBY, Vitiate kept Nathema completely out of the conflict. While the Empire's fleets clashed with Republic forces across multiple star systems, while Sith and Jedi died by the thousands, Nathema remained untouched, isolated by distance and Vitiate's deliberate neutrality. This decision proved remarkably prescient. The Great Hyperspace War ended in catastrophic defeat for the Sith Empire. Naga Sadow's initial victories gave way to Republic counterattacks. The Jedi Order rallied their strength and pushed back across every front. When Sadow's forces retreated to Korriban itself, they found Ludo Kresh waiting with his own fleet, and the civil war that erupted in orbit sealed the Empire's doom. The Republic showed no mercy. Their forces systematically hunted down and destroyed every Sith stronghold they could find. Korriban was devastated. Zeost fell. The academies where young Sith learned the dark side were reduced to rubble. The grand temples built over centuries crumbled under Republic bombardment. The native Sith species, already reduced through generations of interbreeding with human dark Jedi, faced near extinction as Republic forces swept through system after system. In the aftermath of this catastrophe, as surviving Sith scattered and hid, Lord Vitiate finally emerged from his century of isolation. But he did not come to offer hope or salvation. He came to feed the Nathema ritual. The destruction of the Sith Empire had left survivors in a state of pure terror. The Republic forces, led by the Jedi, were methodically hunting down every last remnant of Sith civilization. Starvation, disease, and infighting killed as many Sith as Republic attacks. The survivors saw their culture, their way of life, their very existence balanced on the edge of extinction. It was in this crucible of fear and desperation that Vitiate made his move. From his untouched sanctuary on Nathema, Lord Vitiate began broadcasting messages across the remnants of the Empire. His speeches painted vivid pictures of Republic vengeance. He described in detail how the Jedi would pursue them to the ends of the galaxy, how there would be no mercy, no survivors. He stoked every fear, magnified every terror, drove the scattered Sith into an absolute panic. The dark side fed on their collective dread, growing stronger with each passing day. But Vitiate did not merely spread terror. He also offered hope. He claimed to possess knowledge of a powerful Sith ritual, a working of dark side magic more complex and potent than anything attempted in generations. This ritual, he promised, would unlock unprecedented power. With it, they could destroy the Jedi Order and save the Sith Empire from annihilation. All that was required was for the remaining Sith Lords to gather anathema and participate in this great working. Simultaneously, Vitiate had set his researchers and scholars to a secret task. He ordered them to locate a long-lost Sith colony world named Dromund Kaas. The planet's location had been forgotten centuries ago, lost in the chaos of the Empire's expansion. But Vitiate needed it. His plans extended far beyond the ritual he was preparing. 3 days after his research team successfully rediscovered the hyperspace routes to Dromund Kaas, Vitiate announced the commencement of his ritual. More than 8,000 Sith Lords answered Vitiate's summons. They came from hiding places across the galaxy, drawn by desperation and the promise of salvation. They represented everything that remained of Sith power: warriors, sorcerers, alchemists, and scholars. Every faction, every philosophy, every tradition within the Sith gathered on Nathema, united by fear of extinction and hope for survival. When they arrived at Vitiate's palace, the trap closed. Lord Vitiate was not merely powerful in the Force. He had spent 100 years mastering the most subtle and terrifying aspects of Sith sorcery. As the 8,000 Sith Lords gathered, Vitiate reached out through the dark side and dominated their minds. 8,000 individual wills, each one strong in the Force, each one trained in resisting mental attacks, fell before Vitiate's overwhelming power. He enslaved them all, binding their consciousness to his own, turning them into living batteries of dark side energy. The ritual that followed took 10 days to complete. Picture it: 8,000 Sith Lords standing motionless in perfect geometric patterns around Vitiate's palace, their minds no longer their own, their power being channeled through the young Sith Lord at the ritual's center. The dark side energy swirling around Nathema grew so intense that the planet's atmosphere itself seemed to darken. The Force was being twisted, perverted, reshaped into something it was never meant to be. Vitiate had discovered something that no other Sith had ever fully understood. The Force was not just energy to be manipulated. It was life itself. And if life could be taken, consumed, made into pure power, then immortality was not just possible, but inevitable. The ritual Vitiate performed was not the grand working of salvation he had promised his victims. It was genocide on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed, an atrocity so profound that it would leave a permanent scar on reality itself. On the 10th day, the ritual reached its culmination. The dark side energy that had been building and building and building for days and nights suddenly expanded outward in a wave that swept across the entire planet. In less than a minute, every living thing on Nathema died. The 8,000 Sith Lords who had come seeking salvation were consumed first, their life force and their strength in the Force drawn into Vitiate. Then the wave spread. Farmers in distant fields collapsed and crumbled to dust. Animals in the forests fell dead where they stood. Plants withered. Insects stopped mid-flight and tumbled from the air. Even microbes in the soil ceased to exist. But Vitiate did not simply kill them. He consumed them. Every death on Nathema fed power into the ritual's center. into the Sith Lord who had orchestrated this cosmic atrocity. The life force of millions of beings, from the 8,000 Sith Lords to the smallest bacterium, all of it poured into Vitiate. The sheer magnitude of death and suffering would have destroyed any normal being. But Vitiate was not normal. He had been born wrong, and now he was becoming something even less human than before. The ritual accomplished what Vitiate had spent a century researching. It stripped the Force itself from Nathema. The planet became a void, a wound in reality, where the living energy that bound the galaxy together simply ceased to exist. The very fabric of existence on Nathema was warped by what had been done. Colors appeared faded and washed out to anyone who later visited the world. Sounds became flat and muted. The orange sun, when viewed through Nathema's atmosphere, appeared a dull brown. Force-sensitive individuals who later set foot on the dead world described feeling physically ill, as if their very spirit was being pulled toward oblivion. And at the center of this devastation stood Vitiate, transformed. The life force of millions, the power of 8,000 Sith Lords, all of it now resided within him. The ritual had granted him something that every Sith before him had sought but failed to achieve: true immortality. Not the extended life that came from dark side practices, not the fragile continuation offered by essence transfer. Vitiate had become fundamentally undying, sustained by the greatest mass death in galactic history. But the transformation went beyond mere immortality. Vitiate had become stronger in the Force than any Sith who had come before him. His power now existed on a scale that dwarfed normal Force users. Where other Sith Lords could influence minds or call lightning, Vitiate could strip entire planets of life. Where others could extend their existence for decades or centuries, Vitiate would endure for millennia. On that day, in the midst of unimaginable death, the being known as Lord Vitiate effectively ceased to exist. In his place stood something new, something that would simply be called the Emperor. The Emperor looked upon what he had created. Nathema was dead, a lifeless husk of a world, but that served his purposes perfectly. With his research team among the victims of the ritual, only he knew the location of Dromund Kaas. Only he understood what had truly happened on Nathema. He could control the narrative of this place, shape the understanding of events to serve his needs. The Emperor's first act was a masterpiece of manipulation. He blamed the devastation of Nathema on the Jedi. He claimed that Republic forces had discovered his world and unleashed some terrible weapon that had destroyed everything. This lie served multiple purposes. It further terrified the remaining Sith, making them more dependent on his leadership. It provided justification for extreme measures, and it allowed him to position himself as the savior who had survived the Jedi's ultimate attack. The Emperor gathered what remained of the Sith Empire. Survivors who had not been on Nathema, younger Sith who had been spared the summons, refugees from worlds devastated by the Republic's assault. He promised them what he had promised the 8,000, salvation and revenge. But this time, he actually intended to deliver. The Emperor had gained ultimate power. Now he would use it to forge an empire worthy of his ambition. He loaded his followers onto a small fleet of ships and departed Nathema. Behind them, the dead world spun silently in space, a monument to the price of absolute power. Ahead lay the unknown regions, the forgotten colony of Dromund Kaas, and a future that would shake the galaxy for the next 1,300 years. Lord Vitiate had been a monster. The being that emerged from Nathema was something far worse. He was patient. He was brilliant. He was utterly devoid of anything resembling conscience or limitation, and he had all the time in the universe to pursue his vision of a galaxy under his absolute control. The dark side had found its perfect vessel, and the galaxy would bleed for it. Exodus and rebirth. The fleet that departed Nathema carried the last fragments of a shattered civilization, where once the Sith Empire had commanded thousands of worlds. Now, only a handful of ships fled into the unknown regions, refugees seeking sanctuary from Republic vengeance. But these were not ordinary refugees. They were led by an immortal being of incomprehensible power who held their only hope for survival. The Emperor's journey to Droman Kas took 20 years. 20 years of wandering through uncharted space, following hyperspace routes that led away from everything they had known. This extended exodus served multiple purposes for the Emperor, purposes that revealed his genius for manipulation and long-term planning. He could have led them directly to Droman Kas, could have reduced the journey to weeks or months. Instead, he deliberately extended their suffering. During those 2 decades adrift, the Sith people came to depend entirely on the Emperor's guidance. Every decision about where to travel, when to stop for supplies, how to ration resources, all of it flowed from the Emperor's throne. The younger generation of Sith, those who had never known the old empire at its height, grew up knowing only this journey and the Emperor who sustained them through it. By the time they finally reached their destination, the Emperor's authority was absolute and unquestioned. Meanwhile, the Emperor took steps to ensure his crimes on Nathema would remain hidden. He systematically erased all hyperspace routes to his former homeworld from every database in the fleet. He eliminated anyone who might have independent knowledge of Nathema's location. He carefully controlled the narrative, allowing only the lie that Nathema had been destroyed by the Jedi to persist in historical memory. The truth of what he had done, the 8,000 Sith Lords he had sacrificed, the millions of lives he had consumed, all of that was buried beneath layers of deception and missing records. In 4980 BBY, after 2 decades of wandering, the fleet finally emerged from hyperspace above Droman Kas. The Sith looked down upon a world of endless storms and savage jungles, a planet that legend claimed was once a Sith colony, but which had been lost to galactic memory for centuries. Lightning split the perpetually dark skies. Rain hammered the dense vegetation. It was a world that seemed actively hostile to civilization, a place where nature itself raged with dark side energy. The Emperor stood before his people on the jungle surface of their new home. He declared the formation of a reconstituted Sith Empire with himself as its eternal leader. He promised that one day they would exact terrible revenge upon the Republic that had driven them into exile. The assembled Sith, exhausted from 20 years of wandering, desperate for stability and purpose, embraced his vision with absolute faith. On that rain-soaked day, the Emperor's authority was complete. He was no longer just their leader. He had become their god. The task of taming Droman Kas and building a new civilization fell largely to the Dark Council, a body of 12 Sith Lords that the Emperor established to oversee the various aspects of imperial governance. This was another stroke of brilliance. The emperor delegated the tedious work of administration while maintaining absolute control over strategic decisions. The Dark Council answered to him in all things, but they also absorbed the resentment and frustration that comes with governing a recovering civilization. Among the early heroes of the Dromund Kaas settlement was Odile Viken, a brilliant military mind who would later become one of the architects of the imperial military. Viken led campaigns to clear the jungle and establish safe zones for settlement. The native fauna of Dromund Kaas included creatures warped by exposure to the planet's natural dark side energies. Tarantai Techs, massive reptilian predators that fed on Force-sensitive beings, and countless other horrors that emerged from the storms and shadows. The construction of Kaas City became the focal point of the Empire's rebuilding efforts. The capital rose from cleared jungle, its architecture reflecting the Sith values of imposing strength and absolute order. At its heart stood the Imperial Citadel, a massive complex that would house the Emperor's throne room, the chambers of the Dark Council, and the three great ministries: war, intelligence, and logistics. Every stone, every structure in Kaas City was positioned to inspire awe and enforce the hierarchical nature of Sith society. The Emperor maintained his personal space station in orbit, a temple fortress where he could meditate and conduct experiments with the dark side away from prying eyes. He also established the Sith Sanctum in the Citadel and created the Imperial Guard, an elite force of warriors bonded directly to his will. These guards answered only to the Emperor, existing completely outside the Dark Council's authority. Over the next 1,000 years, the Sith Empire slowly rebuilt its strength. They established the Sith Academy on the ancient world of Korriban, training new generations in the ways of the dark side. They expanded to neighboring systems, carefully and methodically, always avoiding attention from the Republic. They developed new technologies, new techniques in Sith sorcery, new ways of channeling the dark side. The Emperor himself remained distant from daily affairs. He would occasionally intervene to crush challenges to his authority. Around 4.06 BBY, a Sith named Kelith Ur began preaching a philosophy that blended Jedi concepts of peace with dark side practice. The Emperor personally killed the heretic and sealed his spirit in the Dark Temple on Dromund Kaas, where it would serve as a warning to others. When a Sith Lord named Vodal Kresh attempted rebellion less than 4 centuries after the Great Hyperspace War, breeding an army of slaves on the planet Athis, the Emperor destroyed the entire operation and declared the world forbidden. But these interventions were rare. For the most part, the Emperor pursued his own mysterious goals, withdrawing deeper into isolation, exploring aspects of the Force that no other being dared to touch. He was searching for something, working toward a plan that remained hidden even from his Dark Council. And slowly, terribly, that plan began to take shape. The Mandalorian Gambit. Around 3078 BBY, approximately 1,000 years after settling on Dromund Kaas, the Emperor decided it was time to test the Republic. He needed to know if his ancient enemy had grown weak during the Millennium of Peace. He needed to understand their military strength, their resolve, their capacity to respond to coordinated assault. But he could not risk revealing his empire prematurely. The solution demonstrated the Emperor's gift for manipulation, across cultures and species. The Mandalorians were a warrior culture spread across the Outer Rim. They valued strength, honor in combat, and the glory of conquest above all else. Their society was built around the concept of the Mandalore, a singular war leader whose authority unified the scattered clans. At this time, a powerful warrior known as Mandalore the Ultimate held that position. He was ambitious, charismatic, and eager to prove the Mandalorians' martial superiority. The Emperor sent a Sith emissary to Mandalore the Ultimate. This emissary claimed to serve a descendant of Lord Dramath II, Dramath's legitimate son, who had fled Medrius centuries ago, rather than face young Tenebrae. The emissary told Mandalore that his master knew the location of Dramath II's tomb on the frozen world of Rekiad, and that within that tomb lay secrets of great power. Mandalore agreed to help the emissary search for the tomb. Together, they traveled to Rekiad and broke into the ancient crypt. There, they recovered Dramath II's remains and, more importantly, a datachron containing information about the Sith and their history. In exchange for this assistance, the emissary shared with Mandalore a vision that the Emperor had supposedly received, a vision of the Mandalorians crushing the Galactic Republic in glorious conquest. But this was no vision. It was manipulation. The Emperor had used dark side techniques to plant suggestions in Mandalore's mind, twisting his thoughts subtly toward war with the Republic. The warrior culture of the Mandalorians made them susceptible to the promise of legendary conquest. Their code of honor could be exploited through properly framed challenges. The Emperor understood these psychological pressure points and applied them with surgical precision. 2 years later, in 3976 BBY, the Mandalorian Wars began. Mandalorian clans swept into Republic space in a coordinated assault. They attacked world after world in the Outer Rim, conquering and devastating with brutal efficiency. The Republic, long accustomed to peace, struggled to respond. The Jedi Council, cautious and conservative, initially refused to involve the Order in what they viewed as a political conflict. The Emperor observed from Droman Chaos with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The Republic military was being tested. The Jedi were revealing their decision-making process and tactical doctrines, and the Empire remained completely hidden, its hand in the conflict invisible to all participants. The war would generate enormous casualties and suffering, and that suffering fed the dark side, strengthening the Emperor and his servants. The conflict raged for 16 years. Planets burned. Millions died. The Republic teetered on the edge of collapse. And then a variable the Emperor had not fully anticipated entered the equation. A young Jedi Knight named Revan refused to accept the Council's inaction. Revan, and Malak Revan, was in many ways everything a Jedi was supposed to be. Charismatic and brilliant, he had been recognized from a young age as exceptionally gifted in the Force. His master, a woman named Kreia, had taught him to question assumptions and think independently, but perhaps she had taught him too well. When the Mandalorian Wars erupted and the Council ordered the Jedi to remain neutral, Revan saw only innocent people dying while their supposed protectors debated philosophy. Revan began speaking out against the Council's inaction. His arguments were persuasive, his passion compelling. One by one, other Jedi began to listen. The first to join him was Alec, Revan's closest friend, who would later be known by a far darker name. Others followed. Eventually, thousands of Jedi defied the Council and joined what became known as the Revanchist movement, named after Revan himself. In 3962 BBY, Revan took direct command of Republic forces and began turning the tide of the war. He proved to be a military genius, combining brilliant tactical thinking with an almost preternatural ability to predict enemy movements. The Mandalorians, who had seemed unstoppable, suddenly found themselves losing ground. World after world was liberated. The Republic, inspired by Revan's leadership, rallied its strength. But victory came at a price. To defeat the Mandalorians, Revan found himself making increasingly dark choices. He employed strategies that sacrificed entire units to gain tactical advantage. He authorized the use of superweapons that killed indiscriminately. The horrors of war began to change him, to push him closer to the darkness he was fighting against. The war reached its climax at the Battle of Malachor V in 3960 BBY. There, Revan defeated Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat. As the Mandalorian leader lay dying, he revealed something that shocked Revan to his core. The Mandalorians had been manipulated into the war. A hidden Sith Empire had used them to test the Republic's strength. With his last breaths, Mandalore told Revan about the tomb on Rekiad and the Sith influence that had driven him to war. Revan and Malak wasted no time. They traveled to Rekiad and found Dramath II's tomb exactly as Mandalore had described. Inside the crypt, they discovered the datachron left by the Emperor's emissary. The device contained information about Nathema and, crucially, enough data to allow them to trace the hyperspace routes into the unknown regions. What Revan and Malak found should have made them flee back to the Republic to warn of the danger. They discovered Nathema first, a dead world that radiated wrongness in the Force. The complete absence of life and Force energy on the planet defied everything they understood. Then they followed the trail to Dromund Kaas and found a thriving Sith Empire, secretly rebuilt over a millennium, waiting for the right moment to strike. The two Jedi spent months on Dromund Kaas in disguise, gathering intelligence about this hidden enemy. They learned about the Emperor, about his immortality, about his plans to eventually invade the Republic. They discovered enough to understand that the threat was existential. The Republic needed to know. The Jedi needed to prepare. But Revan and Malak made a fatal mistake. They believed they could confront the Emperor directly and assassinate him before his plans came to fruition. They were catastrophically wrong. A member of the Imperial Guard, supposedly sympathetic to their cause, offered to sneak them into the Citadel. They believed they were being clever, using stealth where force would fail. They did not understand that the Imperial Guard were bound directly to the Emperor's will, that their every thought and action was monitored by the being they hoped to kill. They walked willingly into a trap. The Emperor was waiting for them in his throne room. When Revan and Malak attacked, when they brought their combined strength in the light side to bear against him, the Emperor did not fight them physically. He simply reached out through the Force and broke them. His power was so far beyond theirs that resistance was meaningless. He dominated their minds, twisted their wills, and completed their fall to the dark side that the war had begun. Revan and Malak emerged from that throne room as Darth Revan and Darth Malak, Dark Lords of the Sith. The Emperor had turned two of the Republic's greatest heroes into his servants. He ordered them to find and claim the ancient Rakatan Star Forge, a space station capable of producing a limitless war fleet. They were to use it to crush the Republic and prepare for his eventual invasion. Publicly, the Emperor announced that Revan and Malak had been Republic spies who had been captured and executed in the depths of the Citadel. Darth Revan and Darth Malak obeyed their new master. They found the Star Forge and used it to build a massive fleet. They launched the Jedi civil war against the Republic they had once defended. For years, they wreaked havoc, nearly destroying the Jedi Order and bringing the Republic to its knees. But the Emperor had underestimated them. The minds of Revan and Malak were stronger than even the Emperor had anticipated. Slowly, gradually, they began to twist his commands. They suppressed all memory of the Emperor and his hidden empire. They convinced themselves they were acting of their own free will, that their goal was to strengthen the Republic by conquering it, to prepare it for the true Sith they had forgotten they had actually met. The conditioning remained, but the specific control did not. The Jedi Civil War ended when Revan, his memory wiped by the Jedi Council and retrained as a Jedi, defeated Malak in battle and destroyed the Star Forge. But Revan's story was far from over. Fragmented memories began to surface. Nightmares of a terrible emperor. Visions of Dromund Kaas. The truth he had been forced to forget clawed its way back into his consciousness. In 3954 BBY, Revan's search for answers led him back to Nathema. There, he was captured by Darth Nihilus, a member of the Dark Council, and her ally, the Sith Lord Scourge. Nihilus and several other council members had discovered the truth about what the Emperor had done on Nathema. They understood that he planned to perform a similar ritual on a galactic scale, consuming all life to fuel his own immortality. They were plotting to overthrow him. 4 years later, Revan's protege, Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile, came searching for her old mentor. She found him imprisoned on Dromund Kaas and freed him. Together with Lord Scourge, who had come to understand the scope of the Emperor's evil, they launched an assault on the Emperor's throne room, attempting to kill the immortal Sith once and for all. They failed. At the critical moment, Scourge betrayed them. He had experienced a vision of the future, a glimpse of possibilities yet to come. In his vision, he saw that Revan and Surik would not succeed in killing the Emperor, and that failure would doom everything. But he also saw a future where the Emperor could be defeated, though not by them. Scourge made his choice in an instant. He killed Mitra Surik with a single strike and allowed the Emperor to capture Revan alive. The Emperor rewarded Scourge with immortality, binding him to the Emperor's own life force. Scourge would endure for centuries, serving as the Emperor's wrath, waiting for the hero he had seen in his vision. As for Revan, the Emperor had special plans. He placed the Jedi Knight in stasis, keeping him conscious but helpless, a prisoner who would endure for 300 years. During those 3 centuries, Revan waged a different kind of war. His mind, even imprisoned, was formidable enough to resist the Emperor completely. More than resist, Revan managed to influence the Emperor, to plant suggestions in the dark being's consciousness. He delayed the planned invasion of the Republic by centuries. He subtly encouraged the Emperor to seek peace instead of conquest. It was a victory measured not in battles won, but in time bought, and the cost to Revan's psyche was incalculable. The Emperor grew distracted during this period. Something else captured his attention, something beyond the borders of his Sith Empire. But before we explore that, we must understand what Revan's delay allowed to occur. The Emperor had waited long enough. In 3681 BBY, despite Revan's influence, the Sith Empire was ready. The Great Galactic War was about to begin. The Great Galactic War. For 1,300 years, the reconstituted Sith Empire had waited in the shadows. For 1,300 years, they had built their strength, expanded their territory in the unknown regions, and prepared for the day when they would return to reclaim the galaxy. That day arrived in the year 3681 BBY, when the Sith Empire revealed itself to a republic that had long forgotten they existed. The initial attacks were devastating. Sith fleets emerged from hyperspace across multiple sectors simultaneously. Worlds that had known centuries of peace suddenly found themselves under assault from an enemy they thought extinct. The Republic's military, unprepared for warfare on this scale, scrambled to respond. The Jedi Order, still respected, but no longer the militant force it had once been, mobilized to defend Republic worlds. The Great Galactic War lived up to its name. For 28 years, the conflict raged across the galaxy. Thousands of Jedi and Sith perished in battle. Entire star systems were devastated. The Republic's economy buckled under the strain of maintaining a war effort against an enemy that seemed inexhaustible. Trade routes were severed, particularly the critical Hydian Way, connecting the Outer Rim to the core worlds, which came under sustained Mandalorian blockade at the Emperor's direction. The Emperor himself remained on Dromund Kaios, orchestrating strategy through his Dark Council. He had delegated much of the day-to-day command to his Sith Lords, particularly powerful figures like Darth Malgus and Darth Angral. But the Emperor's attention was not fully focused on the war. Revan's influence, working subtly through their psychic connection, was tempering his bloodlust. And something else had begun to capture the Emperor's interest, a discovery that would reshape his plans entirely. By 3653 BBY, both sides had reached a stalemate. The Republic was exhausted, its resources depleted, its people war-weary. The Empire had achieved tremendous gains, but found that occupying territory was more difficult than conquering it. The Emperor, growing impatient with the war's slow progress and distracted by his other pursuits, surprised everyone by instructing his Dark Council to offer peace negotiations. The Republic Senate, desperate for respite, agreed to meet with Imperial representatives on Alderaan. The negotiations were tense, with neither side trusting the other. Jedi accompanied the Republic delegation, including notable figures like Grand Master Satele Shan. The Sith, led by Darth Baras, presented terms that were harsh but not impossible. As the talks progressed, it seemed that peace might actually be within reach. Then the trap was sprung. While Republic and Imperial negotiators debated on Alderaan, a massive Sith fleet emerged from hyperspace above Coruscant itself. The assault had been planned with meticulous precision. Darth Malgus led a strike team directly into the Jedi Temple, while Darth Angral commanded the orbital bombardment and ground invasion. The Temple, that 1,000-year-old symbol of Jedi power and Republic security, was destroyed. Jedi by the hundreds were killed in the attack. Angral personally stormed the Senate building and executed Supreme Chancellor Baruchan, claiming the office as his command center. The sacking of Coruscant lasted only 2 days, but its impact was devastating. The Republic's capital was held hostage. Tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of beings died in the assault. When word reached the negotiators on Alderaan, the situation became clear. The Sith had never intended to negotiate in good faith. The peace talks had been cover for their ultimate strike. Darth Baras presented the Treaty of Coruscant with Coruscant itself as leverage. The terms were humiliating. The Republic would withdraw all military forces from contested systems. They would abandon allies who had fought alongside them. They would recognize Sith dominion over approximately half the galaxy. And they would accept Imperial oversight of their remaining territory. The alternative was the complete destruction of Coruscant and everyone on it. The Republic signed. Grand Master Zim and Senator Omriss put their names to a document that marked their defeat. The Great Galactic War ended not with Republic victory, but with Sith triumph. The Jedi Order, blamed by many for the war's outcome, evacuated the ruins of their temple and relocated to their ancient homeworld of Tython. A Cold War began, a tense standoff where both sides prepared for the inevitable resumption of open hostilities. But the Emperor had achieved his immediate goals. The Republic was weakened. The Sith Empire controlled huge swaths of territory. He had tested his military might against the galaxy's dominant power and proven superior. Now he could turn his full attention to what truly interested him, his ultimate ritual, the one that would make the anathema working look like a mere experiment. The Emperor intended to consume all life in the galaxy, yet something held him back. Revan, still imprisoned and still fighting his psychic war, had influenced the Emperor toward accepting the peace. Moreover, the Emperor had become genuinely distracted by his other project. During the long years of the Great Galactic War, he had discovered something in wild space that changed everything. The lost world of Zakul and the Eternal Fleet. Valkorion and the Eternal Empire, the Emperor's discoveries in wild space, revealed possibilities that even his immortal mind had not previously considered. Zakul was an ancient world, home to nomadic tribes with their own unique connection to the Force. More importantly, the system contained the Eternal Fleet, a vast armada of automated ships with technology far beyond anything the Republic or Empire possessed. The ships were controlled through the Force itself, responsive to a sufficiently powerful wielder. Around the same time, the Emperor discovered something else remarkable. A proud Zakulan warrior who possessed exceptional Force potential. His name was Valkorion, and he would become the Emperor's most elaborate disguise. Rather than simply dominating Valkorion's mind, as he had done to countless others, the Emperor took possession of the man's body entirely, suppressing Valkorion's consciousness and assuming his identity completely. This marked a fundamental shift in the Emperor's approach. As Vitiate, ruling the Sith Empire from Dromund Kaas, he had always remained distant and mysterious. As Valkorion, he could be something different entirely. Using his new identity, the Emperor unified Zakul's warring tribes and began constructing a civilization unlike any he had built before. He proclaimed himself the immortal emperor of what he called the Eternal Empire. The Eternal Empire was in many ways the Emperor's idealized vision of civilization. Where the Sith Empire embraced chaos and conflict, the Eternal Empire emphasized order and purpose. Citizens of Zakul received monthly stipends of credits and resources they wanted for nothing materially. This allowed them to focus on higher pursuits: art, philosophy, science. The Emperor encouraged them to view him not as a tyrant, but as a benevolent guide protecting them from the galaxy's savage barbarism. Of course, this benevolence was a facade. The Emperor's ultimate goals remained unchanged. Zakuul and its eternal fleet were tools, means to an end. But maintaining the Valkorian identity required him to play the role convincingly. He took a consort, a knight of Zakuul named Senya Tiral. Together, they had 3 children, twin sons Arkan and Thexan, and a daughter, Vaylin. These children represented something unusual for the Emperor. They were biologically the offspring of the human body he inhabited, but they inherited their strength in the Force from the dark entity possessing that body. Arkan, Thexan, and Vaylin were immensely powerful, and the Emperor saw potential in molding them as extensions of his will. However, his approach to parenting was characteristically cold and manipulative. Valkorion taught his children that they could achieve anything if they were willing to sacrifice everything. He rotated their guards constantly to prevent them from forming emotional attachments. He remained emotionally distant, viewing them as tools to be shaped rather than people to be loved. When Senya objected to his treatment of their children, he allowed her to leave, never speaking to her again. Only later would he recognize this as a mistake, but by then, irreparable damage had been done. The Emperor's division of attention between the Sith Empire, as Vitiate, and the Eternal Empire, as Valkorion, created a strange duality. He maintained separate consciousness in both identities, effectively existing in 2 places simultaneously. The Sith Empire continued to function under the guidance of his Dark Council, while Zakuul flourished under Valkorion's visible rule. Neither society knew the other existed, and the Emperor kept it that way for centuries. During this time, Revan finally managed to escape his long imprisonment. Republic forces freed him, and he immediately seized control of an ancient space station called the Foundry, intending to use it to build an army that could destroy the Sith Empire. But Revan's 300 years of imprisonment had fractured his psyche. When an Imperial strike team killed him on the Foundry, his spirit split. His light side merged with the Force in peace, but his dark side rejected death and lingered, consumed by a single purpose: to kill the Emperor permanently. The Dark Revan managed to awaken the Emperor's spirit on Yavin 4, where it had been dormant after the hero of Tython destroyed one of the Emperor's host bodies. Dark Revan intended to resurrect the Emperor to a physical form so he could finally kill him completely. A coalition of Republic and Imperial forces, recognizing the danger, united to stop Revan. They succeeded, and the 2 halves of Revan's spirit finally merged and found peace. But Revan's plan had unintended consequences. The enormous death toll from the battle on Yavin 4 fed the Emperor's spirit, giving him strength. He struck at the planet Ziost, a former throne world of the Sith Empire. There, the Emperor's disembodied consciousness possessed the entire population, forcing them to kill each other in a massive bloodbath. When enough death had occurred, the Emperor performed his ritual again, consuming all life on Ziost just as he had done to Nathema millennia before. The devastation of Ziost marked a turning point. The Emperor abandoned his Sith Empire completely, casting off Vitiate as he had once discarded Tenebrae. His Dark Council, recognizing that he viewed them as food for his next ritual, declared him an enemy. Darth Mar assumed leadership and began rebuilding Imperial strength while preparing to stop their former master. The Emperor no longer cared. He had Zakuul and the Eternal Fleet. It was time to reveal his creation to the galaxy. The final confrontation. In 3637, BBY, the Eternal Empire emerged from wild space with devastating force. Valkorian's twin sons, Archon and Thexan, led the Eternal Fleet in simultaneous assaults against both Republic and Imperial territories. The automated warships of the Eternal Fleet proved overwhelmingly superior to anything either power possessed. Fleets that had survived the Great Galactic War were obliterated in minutes. Entire systems fell in days. During a battle, a prominent figure from both Republic and Imperial forces was captured. The Outlander, a champion who had fought against the Emperor's machinations for years. Also captured was Darth Mar, leader of the Dark Council. They were brought before Valkorian on his eternal throne. Mar immediately recognized Valkorian as simply another face of the Sith Emperor they had served and later denounced. Valkorian offered both prisoners a chance to kneel before him. Mar refused and attacked, declaring that he would rather die than serve the being who had betrayed the Empire. Valkorian killed Darth Mar with a single gesture, a casual display of the power gap between them. He then turned to the Outlander and made the same offer. But before the Outlander could respond, Archon seized his opportunity. The Emperor's son had long resented his father's emotional distance. During a recent campaign, Archon had lost his left arm and sustained terrible facial injuries. When he and Thexan presented their conquests to Valkorian, their father turned away, uninterested. Archon had attacked him then, and in the resulting chaos, Thexan had been accidentally killed while protecting his father. That guilt and rage had festered in Archon. Now, with Valkorian distracted by the Outlander, Archon struck. The attack should have failed. Valkorian's power dwarfed his son's, but the Emperor allowed it to succeed. In that moment, as Archon's lightsaber pierced Valkorian's body, the Emperor's consciousness abandoned the dying form and invaded the Outlander's mind. The transfer appeared to observers as if the Outlander had assassinated the Emperor. Archon used this to his advantage, blaming the Outlander and ordering them frozen in carbonite while he claimed the eternal throne. For the Outlander, carbonite imprisonment became something far stranger. Valkorian's consciousness resided within their mind, speaking to them, offering guidance and harsh lessons. The Emperor claimed he was preparing the Outlander to rule the galaxy properly, to create the perfect civilization he had always envisioned. In truth, he was grooming a new vessel, strengthening the Outlander so that eventually he could possess them completely. 5 years later, the Outlander escaped carbonite with help from allies and began a campaign against Archon's tyrannical rule. Valkorian counseled the Outlander throughout, providing knowledge and power while maintaining the fiction that he wanted to help. The Outlander liberated Zakuul from Archon's brutality and later faced Vaylin, who had succumbed completely to her own darkness. In a final confrontation, Valkorian struck down his own daughter, consuming her powerful Force essence to strengthen himself further. Then, at last, the Emperor revealed his true intentions. He attempted to take complete possession of the Outlander's body and mind. He had spent years preparing this vessel, making them strong enough to contain his consciousness indefinitely. With the Outlander as his permanent host and the Eternal Fleet at his command, the Emperor would be unstoppable. He would perform his ultimate ritual and consume the galaxy itself. But the Emperor had made a fatal miscalculation. The Outlander was not alone in their mind. Throughout the ordeal, they had been gathering allies, forming connections, building relationships that transcended the physical. When the final battle of wills occurred, the Outlander called upon everyone who had ever stood against the Emperor. The spirit of Valen, freed from her father's domination and death. The bound consciousness of Lord Dramath, the Emperor's biological father, whom he had imprisoned in a holocron for over 1,000 years, and Senya Tiral, the mother who had tried to save her children from the monster wearing their father's face. The Emperor, who had always viewed others as resources to be consumed, found himself facing the very people he had used most cruelly. The mental confrontation was catastrophic. The combined strength of his victims, led by the Outlander's indomitable will, tore apart the Emperor's consciousness. After 15 centuries of existence, after consuming billions of lives, after reshaping civilizations and manipulating galactic events, the entity that had been Tenebrae, Vitiate, the Sith Emperor, and Valkorion was finally destroyed. His death marked the end of one of the longest-running threats in galactic history. The void in the Force that had been anathema began to heal. Color and life slowly returned to the dead world, though it would take generations for the planet to fully recover. The Emperor's various fragments and host bodies crumbled or faded. The dark side energies he had bound to himself dissipated back into the Force. The Eternal Fleet, no longer controlled by the Emperor's consciousness, was disabled by the Outlander to prevent it from ever being used for conquest again. Zakul began the long process of becoming a normal society rather than the idealized but ultimately hollow civilization the Emperor had created. The Sith Empire and Galactic Republic, both devastated by years of conflict, began the equally difficult work of recovery and, eventually, cooperation. The Emperor's ultimate defeat came from the very philosophy he had always rejected. He believed that power was everything, that consuming others made him stronger, that he alone deserved to exist. He never understood that connections between beings could be sources of strength rather than weakness. He saw love, loyalty, and compassion as flaws to be exploited, never as forces that could oppose him. In the end, it was those connections that destroyed him. The people he had tortured, the children he had used, the father he had imprisoned, all of them united against him in the one place he thought himself invulnerable, within the mind of someone he intended to possess. The Emperor had spent 1,500 years preparing for every possible external threat. He never imagined that his downfall would come from within, from the very victims he had believed broken beyond recovery. The galaxy that survived the Emperor's final defeat was fundamentally changed. Entire regions had been devastated. 2 major wars and countless proxy conflicts had killed billions. The political landscape had been reshaped repeatedly. But perhaps most significantly, the experience had demonstrated that even immortal evil could be defeated, though the price was terrible. Historians would spend centuries analyzing the Emperor's impact on galactic civilization. Some argued that his manipulations had inadvertently strengthened the Republic by forcing them to overcome the Mandalorian Wars and later conflicts. Others pointed to the incalculable cost in lives and the permanent damage done to worlds like Nathema and Ziost. The debate would continue long after the last person who had lived through those dark times had passed. What remained undebatable was the scope of the Emperor's evil, from his birth as Tenebrae to his final destruction as Valkorion. He had embodied the darkest potential of the Force. He had proven that immortality without conscience could pose an existential threat to all life. He had demonstrated the dangers of power pursued without limitation or moral consideration. But his defeat also demonstrated something else. That evil, no matter how powerful, how patient, how seemingly inevitable, could be overcome. It required tremendous sacrifice, extraordinary courage, and the willingness of people to stand together against darkness. The Outlander and their allies had provided that final lesson, written in the destruction of an entity that had thought itself beyond all consequence. The Emperor's story ends as it began, with a void. But this void was different from the one that had existed in young Tenebrae's black eyes. This was the absence of a presence that had dominated galactic affairs for a millennium and a half. This was the silence that comes when an all-consuming hunger finally stops feeding. This was the peace that arrives when immortal ambition finally meets mortality. And in that silence, that absence, that peace, the galaxy could finally begin to heal. The history of Darth Vitiate stands as one of the most terrifying cautionary tales in galactic history. From the child who murdered his parents at age 6, to the Emperor who consumed entire planets, from the manipulator who orchestrated galactic wars, to the entity who sought to devour all existence, his story spans the extremes of dark side corruption. Yet for all his power, for all his centuries of life, for all the civilizations he built and destroyed, the Emperor's legacy ultimately was one of failure. He failed to achieve the ultimate godhood he sought. He failed to consume the galaxy. He failed to recognize that the connections between beings could be weapons as devastating as any he possessed. And in failing, he proved that even the most terrible darkness can be overcome by those willing to stand against it. Sleep well, knowing that monsters, even immortal ones, can be defeated. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Star Wars' most terrifying villains, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. What other Sith Lords or dark side users would you like to explore? Let us know, and may the Force be with you.